Hello, and on behalf of the Principles for Responsible Management Education, welcome to the webinar on gender equality, titled Addressing Gender Equality Issues in Management Education and the Workplace. So, this morning we're joined by Patricia Flynn from Bentley University in the United States, Catherine Haynes at Newcastle University Business School in the UK, and Maureen Kilgore from University of St. Boniface School of Business Administration in Canada. I'm Jed Fix, and I'm the coordinator here at the Prime Secretariat in New York. Just a few technical details as we get going. So we have three different presenters with us. I've asked them to, I currently have them unmuted, but I've asked them to mute their phones on their lines. So if you could all do that, please. Okay. Thank you. So this morning we have a few items on the agenda we'd like to talk about. First, we'll hear an introduction from the Prime Working Group on Gender Equality. They're going to share with us information on their global repository project, including types of resources that are available there, the different disciplines that are included, and they'll give us a demonstration of the leadership, accounting, and finance areas. They'll also speak about the next phases of their project and their current activities. So they'll give a talk about what to expect in the future. They'll also talk a little about what you can do to help contribute to the group. At the end, we'll have a few minutes for question and answer. So we get going, I'd like to speak for a brief moment about the Principles for Responsible Management Education, or PRIME. PRIME is a UN-backed initiative to change the curriculum, research, and learning methods of management education based on UN Global Compact principles, or a corporate sustainability approach. It was begun in 2007 and currently has almost 500 signatory schools across the world. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Maureen Kilgore. Maureen, can you unmute your mic, please?
Okay.
Okay. We can hear you. Can you go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
I can.
Okay, great. Good. Well, thanks very much, Jed, and welcome everyone. I wanted just to talk briefly about how we got to this point in time and just sort of the background for our working group on gender equality, and just sort of bring you back a little bit to kind of the areas of corporate social responsibility and gender equality in general. And until very recently, these two areas inhabited quite distinct universes. However, in the past 5 years, there have been a number of significant initiatives at the global level and local national levels which attempt to sort of integrate gender inequality and to address gender inequality in corporate social responsibility initiatives and corporate partnerships. Some very sort of famous examples of these would be the Nike-sponsored World Bank initiative on adolescent girls, so the Adolescent Girls Initiative. The Global Reporting Initiative and the International Financial Corporation both teamed up recently to produce guidelines on how to address gender in sustainability reporting. So those are sort of two of the more popular initiatives. But also at the level of the UN, there have been a number of things. So that's sort of the background to that, is that there hasn't been a lot done on gender in the area of corporate responsibility, corporate citizenship, but that's starting to change. Most of you would also be aware of the United Nations Global Compact, which is the UN's corporate citizenship initiative, which was launched in 2001. This is seen as the world's largest CSR initiative and currently has over 10,000 corporate signatories and participants from other stakeholder groups, unions, NGOs, etc. Now, the Global Compact has 10 principles in the area of human rights, labor rights, the environment, and corruption. And while gender is not mentioned explicitly in any of those 10 principles, they obviously all have a gender component and apply to women as well as men. However, as can often happen, gender seems to be ignored when these types of instruments are gender neutral at their face value. So that's sort of the background for how our working group came to be. The Global Compact a number of years ago decided that it was important to bring gender forward and to give it more exposure in its principles. And in order to address that, they teamed up with UNIFEM, now UN Women, to produce a standalone initiative in order to bring gender equality to the forefront. So in March 2010, the UN Global Compact and UN Women launched what are known as the Women's Empowerment Principles, whose goal is to help the private sector focus on elements key to promoting gender equality in the workplace, marketplace, and community. And so they have a number of, again, more principles, but they have a number of principles which deal with workplace discrimination, violence against women, women in leadership, health and safety, etc. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Great, thanks very much. So I made reference to the fact that corporate social responsibility and gender tended to inhabit separate universes in the corporate sector. It was not only the case in the corporate sector, but also was apparent in academia and in research on these corporate initiatives. So case studies, journals, books on CSR all tended to ignore women and ignore gender. This is also changing, but in my opinion, more slowly than the corporate sector. So that brings us to the challenge that we have is to, for those who are involved in management education, to try and integrate gender into business schools and management education generally through case studies, networks, development of research, promotion of this idea in business schools. So the stars were perfectly aligned for an initiative like the Prime Working Group on Gender Equality, which was first discussed at the Global Compact's consultation in 2009 and was officially launched in 2011. It has since become a dynamic, productive, and effective working group with representatives and interests coming from many parts of the world. And I just wanted to note at that point in terms of our global reach, well, the main work of the repository is conducted in English. We welcome any participation, management, education materials in any language. So I just wanted to slip that in. If we can go to the next slide, Jen. Thanks very much. Oops, sorry, just if you can back up a bit. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. So the mission is, I have here the mission. I don't want to read it because it's there in front of you, but the goal is to really bring together academics and employers to support the integration of gender issues into management education, etc. And we link on the slide there, you'll see the link to 3 of the WEP principles, Women's Empowerment Principles specifically. And the other thing I wanted to point out also is the second bullet point, which says part of our mission is to go beyond the current restrictive paradigm of diversity and equal opportunity. The reason we have that there is because what we found with a lot of the, and research has shown that a lot of the corporate initiatives on gender tend to be very restricted to the issues of women in the formal women as formal sector workers, diversity programs, women in leadership, corporate leadership, anti-discrimination programs, and neglect to address how their corporate activities support or impact on women in all the other areas, for example, environmental issues, corruption, other non-labor human rights issues, for example. So while these are, of course, extremely important, we feel it's important to go beyond this paradigm and push for integrating gender into all areas of management education and not just courses on diversity, for example, which are necessary, but not enough. Sorry, for the next slide, please, Jen. Thanks very much. So this next slide identifies some of the goals we have identified in the first year, or we've developed in the first year, and we're developing a network of people that want to integrate gender into management education. We're developing a repository of resources. We're going to advocate for new research and case studies, and we're collaborating with other prime partners and working groups. And because my colleagues are going to talk about the first issue, the first bullet points there, I just wanted to close by mentioning, just commenting on the last bullet point, which is important for us because we have working groups in Prime on poverty, corruption, and there was one on climate change, I believe. And I guess from our perspective, it's really important to say that those are not distinct areas of interest, but also are gendered, and that we're really looking forward to working with the other working groups and making sure that all of the work of Prime is gendered as well. So right now, thank you for your attention. I'd like to pass on to my colleague Pat Flynn, who's going to discuss one of our key projects of the past year and who has been the key person involved in getting that up and running. So on to you, Pat.
Pat, do we have you here? Yeah.
Yes, hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so as Maureen said, I'm going to be talking about the global repository that was our first project. And basically, this repository is collecting a wide variety of information and links that will help faculty to either expand upon current information or courses that they're working on, or to get them started in the first place. It's also considered a really important resource for deans, several of whom I have met with, that think this is a great tool for them to be able to guide faculty to help them get much more involved in gender issues in the classroom. It will also be helpful to employers, and as you'll see in just a minute, we have several case studies that are actual case studies talking about how companies, either after they have been sued or otherwise, have moved pretty dramatically in the area of integrating gender equality into the workplace. The repository has three major parts: teaching resources and materials, research materials, and good practices and innovations. And we'll be coming back to those in another slide, so I won't spend much more time right here on those. But I did want to point out the last bullet point here is pretty important. We see this repository as not only an inventory of what's out there, but also sort of a way to identify where the gaps are in available resources. For example, if you were looking for a case study of a female CFO, we haven't found one yet. Now, there are plenty of CFOs that are female, but we haven't found a case study that actually discusses that. So it's those kinds of things that we think we can use the repository to identify. Then we'd like to work with the corporate signatories and other foundations and agencies that might be willing to support development of new case studies and new research in these areas to fill in those gaps. Next slide, please. Okay, so far during our last year, we focused primarily on getting the teaching materials up on the repository. We now have an international group of developers and coordinators, and I'll come back to that in just a moment as well. We have the wiki space up and running, and I'm happy to say that we officially launched the repository with about materials in 15 different disciplines at the Prime Global Forum, which was in June in Rio. And I'm happy to say that several of us were able to attend and talk to the various people, not only in our working group, but in other working groups as well, about the resource. Next slide. So what we're doing this year is getting more developers and coordinators. Several areas we still are lacking people who can help us to update the materials as they come along. We also are going to add to that repository the research and the good practices and innovations. The other key thing we think is really important is to market the repository. if it exists and it's easy to use but no one knows about it, then that's not going to help us either. So we really want to get the word out to the deans, to faculty, to academic professional associations, as well as to the corporate signatories as well. Next slide. So these are the subgroups that we have materials posted already. And just to point out, if you see accounting and finance, and then later on you see finance, the accounting and finance was originally pulled together by Catherine Haynes, who you will hear from relatively soon. And we're separating those out, and we are very actively looking for someone in the finance area who will help us. So if you know of somebody, please get in touch with us. But as you can see when you go down this list, we're not looking just at accounting, finance, economics, management, and leadership. We're really taking a much more broad approach in saying, what are the topics and the courses that business and management students take? So that's why you see history and anthropology. On the next slide also you will see some additional areas. So we're really trying to be comprehensive in terms of the repository instead of just focusing on very narrowly, say, economics, finance, and management. Next slide shows, I just wanted to flag some of the types of resources that are currently available. And case studies. There are many, many case studies. The two that I have listed here are just a couple to show you that these case studies are not only good for faculty, but they can also be very helpful for employers as well. So in these two, the Unilever case, that was a case where they decided to market Dove using regular, ordinary women, women who are not models, women who are not working for an agency, but they went out and got just regular, everyday women to market this product, and it was a huge success. So they talk about how they do that and the reaction as well. The Sodexo case actually talks about what Sodexo did after there was a lawsuit. So this was an example where they all of a sudden were under the gun to do something, and they actually outlined the specific steps and where they're going from there. And it's a very helpful case, again, for faculty in the classroom talking about how change can come about, but also from employers as well. Next bullet talks about syllabi. We also have quite a few syllabi there. I had to flag the one in the economics area, the gender perspectives in economic analysis. This one's in the macroeconomic side, and it's from American University. And I really encourage you to take a look at the syllabus if you're in the economics field, because it includes 84 readings for the students. Now, obviously, some of those are supplementary. They're not all required. But there's an extensive display of readings, and they include things like gender equality in macroeconomics in developed countries. Does gender equality hurt growth and development? Are women more risk averse? Does globalization help or hurt the gender pay gap? So it's really, in and of itself, an extraordinary resource. American University also has a course that's a microeconomics component, and that particular syllabus is also posted on the website. That one has over 100 citations and references, and again, it's an extraordinary collection in and of itself. So I wanted to highlight those two, as well as Diana Vilmoria's Women in Organizations. That's a case, that's, a syllabus for a course that is offered on 4 Saturdays from 9 to 5. So that also gives you some sense of innovation in curriculum and different ways to offer courses. We also have texts. I highlighted in particular the first one from 1996 because it talks about masculinities, and we mentioned this several times as well as when we've been working with several of our coordinators, that this repository really should include men as well as women, that we want to get people away from thinking gender means female. So I think we have to do more work on this area because so far we don't have a lot of things regarding males and masculinity in the database, but we are focusing on that as an area to further expand. Next slide, please. We also have other resources, and this is just a slide slide to show you that the resources are really from all over the world. So yes, we have some from the United States. I would be remiss not to point out the last one there, the Aspen Institute Center for Business Education. That particular resource, if you're not familiar with it, really deserves your time and attention. They have a couple of websites that include materials. One is called caseplace.org. Another one is called Beyond Gray Pinstripes, and they provide you an abstract. They provide you the direct link to the case, and it is an extraordinarily comprehensive resource, so I'd encourage you to check that one out. But as you can also see, we have resources at the International Labor Organization in Switzerland. We have the African Women's Development and Communication Network in Kenya. We have materials in Hong Kong. And each of these has a link on the site as well as a short description so people using the repository have some sense of what that particular organization does. Okay, next slide. So what I'd like to do now is actually show you the repository in terms of how the material is organized by those 15 different disciplinary areas. So let's see if I can get this on. Okay, just wait a moment. Okay, so here you see the repository first page, and it lists some additional background resources as well. But if we scroll down, I don't seem to be able to do that. I think you'll have to scroll down for me. If you continue to scroll down, here's where you'll see each of the different topics, and it's just a question of going to the particular area. And I'm going to stop at leadership. Wait. I'm going to look at the one in leadership in particular and just click on the leadership download. And here you will see a table of contents, and each of the different disciplinary areas has a table of contents. And I'm not going to click on these, but I just wanted to highlight some of the materials. So each of these case studies in the repository have a paragraph description as well as the link. So if you go down a little further, background noise. If you will go down a little, the additional case studies beyond the Sodexo one I mentioned earlier, that you will also see the PepsiCo, as well as several other real case studies that demonstrate what companies are doing successfully in the workplace. Okay, if we go down a little further, you'll see where they have the buy and purchase. Again, this appears in each of the different disciplines. And we list the textbooks, practices. This is an area we'll be a focal point for the first year. And then we also provide these links to active associations. It's been very important for us. For instance, the Academy of Management, which is one of the links provided. Academy of Management has a group called Gender and Diversity in Organizations, GDO. If you're not familiar with it, it's really worth taking a look at. This is a link to management with various syllabi and course materials. So they are now helping us to get materials into the repository. They are now also using the repository to upgrade their data. The Academy of Management also, when they found out about this repository, made arrangements so that we could have a presentation at their annual meeting, which took place in Boston this past month. Very helpful. We definitely want to work with other professional associations. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who's going to talk a bit about the accounting, finance, as well as next steps.
Thanks, Pat. I'll just ask you, Jed, if you could go back. That's great. Thank you. Can we just go back one slide? I'm going to show you the accounting and finance very briefly, what's going on in that discipline. You might have to give me the mouse, I think, Jed. Thank you. As Pat was saying, we have a number of different disciplines being represented. Some of them are populated quite a bit more than others because it's an ongoing work. I just to give you a very in finance, if we can get it to work. As Pat said earlier, we originally conceived of this as accounting and finance together, but we are subsequently looking for a further coordinator for the finance part so we can separate these two areas off slightly, recognising that there is perhaps slight difference in the disciplinary areas. But at the moment they are both put together, and you can see that some disciplinary areas really lend themselves to a whole rich source of information and curriculum data on gender, and some are a bit thinner than others. Accounting is an area where there's perhaps a little bit less than some of the areas, but there are some good and interesting materials. I'm trying to click down to the syllabi. Here we go, sorry. There's a slight time lag on the webinar, so apologies for that. I wanted to, oh, we've gone too far. I wanted to look at the syllabus for the entrepreneurship, gender and entrepreneurship module here. Well done, thank you. Because I think this is an area in the accounting context where there's quite a lot of work being done in different institutions around the world, because entrepreneurship, and particularly entrepreneurship of women, is something that is of quite significant interest. So as an example, really, I just wanted to show you this program at Newcastle University Business School, where as part of a master's on entrepreneurship, which includes all the usual things of human resources, management consultancy, accounting and finance and so on, we have a specific module on gender issues in entrepreneurship, looking at what motivates women to become entrepreneurs, the kind of financial issues that they have to grapple with, and some of the challenges of obtaining microfinance for small entrepreneurial programs. So I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to get to the detail, but here we are. We can stop there and see that students are, in this module, encouraged to look at various examples and case studies on how social, economic and cultural mores can exert influence on entrepreneurial outcomes, specifically looking at gender-related factors. So that's just one example of the type of syllabus that you might find in the accounting area on the repository. I think actually, given the difficulty moving between things, I'm not going to show you the case. As Pat said, the Aspen Institute has a wonderful resource, the caseplace.org. There's a whole host of cases there that I'd encourage you to look at, including a very good one on the accounting repository, which looks at the Grameen Telecom Village Phone project, looking at in Bangladesh, which supports women entrepreneurs using microcredit to support their communities. It's a really interesting and excellent case, but it's quite a lengthy document, so we won't try to open it at the moment. So I'd encourage any of you who have information you could submit to any of the disciplines to please help us do that. Can we move to the next slide, please, Jed? So in phase 2, our activities for this year have been threefold. The first area of priority is to expand the repository, both in terms of disciplinary areas and in terms of the depth and wealth of materials which we know and we hope are out there that you can help us share in this repository. And the second area is in research and then good practice and innovation. So we're looking for help from you and from your colleagues, from members of faculty who are interested in gender equality in management education. We're particularly looking for more coordinators and developers in the various disciplinary areas. And we've listed some on this slide where we're specifically looking for coordinators. As we've already mentioned, we'd like to separate accounting and finance. So if any of you out there know anyone in the finance area who is willing to act as a coordinator and help us gather materials, please do let us know. That would be excellent. And these other areas as well listed on the slide. As Pat said earlier, we're trying to be as broad as possible in thinking about the sorts of courses and disciplinary areas that are addressed in our business and management schools. So we need help from you to develop the repository further in these areas. So that's the first area of expanding the repository. The second phase of this project for the current year is to expand the repository in terms of a research component. What we'd like to do is include a research component in each of the disciplinary fields that we've already identified. Some of the disciplinary fields have already started to populate the wiki space with information about research, and some are in the early stages of doing that. Now obviously research is a very broad area. In terms of limits and scope, it's boundaryless to some degree. But what we're specifically looking for here is to facilitate the repository of resources for integrating gender into management education and research. So we're advocating for new research and the dissemination of knowledge on the integration of gender issues into management education. We're not looking for a huge bibliography rather, for all of the disciplines, an extensive list of research papers in these areas. What we're really looking for is research papers that can illuminate how gender equality is being addressed in management education, or how gender equality is being taught in leadership courses, different ways in which gender is being addressed in the workplace, and obviously research papers on that, or any research on ways in which gender is being addressed in colleges and universities themselves. We're specifically interested in research that can inform and form part of the management education curriculum. So we would encourage any of you who have any research components that you can add to the repository to please get in touch with with the facilitators, the coordinators of each disciplinary area to share those materials. And then the last part of the agenda for phase 2 this year is the area of good practices and innovations. You'll notice that we've called this good practices and not best practice, because we're recognizing here that practices are context specific and contingent upon the relevant circumstances in that specific situation. So we're not trying to imply here that there is one best practice, one way of doing things. We're looking for examples of good practice, which may vary dependent on national, cultural, social and cultural contexts. So we're seeking examples of good practices and innovations where the interest of gender equality has been extended or developed in organisations or in programmes related to the context of management education. And the idea behind sharing such examples is designed to support and facilitate the sharing of good and innovative practice that can be acted upon in different contexts as a learning tool. So we're seeking examples and case studies of good practice and innovative practice in a number of areas, which might include implementing gender equality into business and management school curricula. These could be case studies or examples. We are seeking examples of implementing gender equality initiatives into the organisation of business and management schools themselves, because we need to put our own houses in order whilst we also talk to organisations about what they're doing in respect of gender equality. So that could be in hiring committees, in leadership roles. It could be in training and development of academic or administrative faculty. It could involve student recruitment and support, or it could be in any way developing a culture which supports gender equality in our schools. And we're also looking for examples and case studies of good and innovative practice in relation to management educators sharing or working with other organisations to share good practice on gender. These other organisations could be other business and management schools, they could be other departments or faculties within the same university, or they could be other forms of organisation, businesses, the public or the voluntary sector more generally. And finally, we're looking for examples and case studies of good and innovative practices in relation to management educators learning from other organisations as well. So if you have any examples of good practices and innovations that you could share with us, then we'd encourage you to do so. Thank you. Now I'll pass on back to Maureen.
Thanks very much, Catherine and Pat. That was wonderful, and it gave us a really good sense of the hard work that's been done by a lot of people, and in one short year, what the group has managed to achieve, and putting a lot of effort into sort of disseminating our information. So I guess looking ahead to the future, as Catherine said, we're going to try and develop, continue to develop gender issues in management education using the current structure of our repository, and also to try and develop good practices and things that are happening in business schools and management education to try and to push the agenda forward. So thank you very much for that, Catherine. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so then finally, I think this is, I don't want to repeat what the others have already said, but I think Pat had also mentioned that we want to identify the gaps, and I'm basically summing up here the gaps that currently exist, and Catherine and Pat presented the list of what we're currently looking for. And we also want to work more closely with the other working groups and PRIME to identify any firms that may be interested in potentially funding the development of case studies where gaps currently exist, to look at developing some case studies or good practice guides for promoting gender equality in workplaces, and also looking for partners or corporations or businesses who may want to offer their own organization as a potential case study. So that's something that we would like to work towards in the next year, the years to follow, I suppose, as soon as we get the current projects more fully developed. But that's going to be our task throughout the years, to try to look for funding and external partners who may be interested in working with us. Could you go to the next slide, please? So again, this is what you can do to help if you're interested in working with us. And you can volunteer to coordinate or assist in the developing a new disciplinary area. Pat is our contact person for that. And all of the areas that we have up and running so far have a coordinator, and some have a couple of people working with them. And so we'd like to sort of build that group of people, either to find coordinators for the gaps that we have, or to just, if you don't have time to be a coordinator but work in accounting or finance or leadership and you want just to be part of that team, feel free to contact the person who's currently coordinating that. And that information is available on our repository website. And the examples there, we've got Camila, Diana, Gudrun, examples there. So we really encourage you to become involved, even if you have a little bit of time or just a little bit of information that could help us out, because as you can see, this started from nothing a year ago, and we've just by you know, word of mouth and personal contacts, we've been able to develop quite a substantial repository. Could you go to the next slide, please? As I said, you can join an existing group, even if you have a little bit of time or a little bit of information. That would be wonderful. And the other thing that we'd really encourage people to do is, in all of your own areas or disciplines, if you have contacts with employers, organizations, firms that you think would be supportive of our goals and would like to be involved in some way in any of the areas that we mentioned earlier, please contact any one of us. It would be Pat, Catherine, or myself, and Jed, who's our contact at the Prime office. And we'd really be pleased to work with you and to try and see what we can develop to further this really important area. I think one of the things that's every day in the business press and even sometimes in the general media, we'll hear more and more about the need to look at how managers are educated and what that bodes for the future. And I think our project here fits really well into that discussion, because there's increasingly sort of criticisms of the way business schools have been educating people, and maybe some of the gaps. And I think our project, along with the other things that Prime is doing, is really helping to modify, change, enhance management education to provide a better group of graduates for the challenges that are coming in the future. So Jed has put up the last contact information for Prime. So we're on the website, and his contacts are there, and he's wonderful at helping move this thing along as well. So please don't hesitate to contact us. And I think right now we'd like to open up for questions or comments or other things that people wanted to raise at this point, if Jed can organize that, I guess. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, all three of you. I certainly found that very timely and thorough and helpful. I hope the other participants did as well. So we do have a few minutes here at the end to take questions. There's two ways through this web platform that are best to do so. One way is, if you have a question, just raise your hand using the raise hand function on the platform toolbar. Another is to go down to the bottom of the toolbar and use the chat function just to write us a quick question. So I'm looking right now at a list of those of you present, and I'm looking for questions. I'll give you just a minute, and if we don't have anyone speak up shortly, then I'll turn it back over to Pat just to share a few more ideas with you. So I'm not seeing any questions immediately. Pat, if you're there, would you like to continue on for just another few minutes and we see if somebody else raises their hand?
Sure, that would be fine. Just maybe expanding upon some of the ways that other people can help us. I mean, we do have the world here at stake, so there's a lot of work to be done. But one of the things that we are thinking about for future reference is organizations, foundations that might be willing to fund faculty, either doing case study materials or research related to these topics. So for instance, the Sloan Foundation in New York has historically provided funds for various work on, I know I had money from them for several years doing Women on Accounting, but they also looked at women in a variety of different industries. So if other people know of such organizations, we don't need for the other people to do exploratory research. They can just pass the information along to us, and then we will take it from there. The same thing with these other professional associations, such as the Academy of Management. I mean, the Academy of Management is just one example, but the way that they were able to help us to get the word out, to just ask us if we could present at their annual meeting, which has 30,000 people attend. So to be able to put on a workshop and explain how to use the repository, and I have to say, if you haven't used the repository yet, it's much more complicated when you're doing a webinar because it's delayed, time delayed, you're trying to figure out which slide and where. It is a very easy tool to use when you're actually on the website, on the wiki space.
Thank you, Pat. I'm going to interrupt for just a moment because I do see a hand up. It looks like Ann Lehman has a question. Ann, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your line so that you can ask your question. Ann, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. One, I wanted to ask, is this repository open to anyone or only people who are members? And two, I mean, I have quite a few, we're in the process of writing a case study about the work that we've been doing here in San Francisco. And I have quite a few contacts at companies. So I'm wondering if I should just go ahead and send those in.
Sure. Let me answer the first part of your question. So yes, the repository is open to anyone, regardless of whether or not your school is necessarily a signatory of PRIME. However, we would encourage you to encourage your school to.
Okay, but I'm not part of a school, so
okay.
I'm part of government.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that the public has access to this, or only schools?
Yeah, the brief answer is yes, the public does have access to it. There's no login to the repository itself. Provided the link, anybody can log on and view the different documents. Pat, would you like to add anything there?
Oh, and absolutely, anybody can access as long as they have a computer and can get to the website. So, and they can access all of the details. They can go to each of the individual disciplines. There's additional information there on how to contact individuals if they want to follow up. So yes, it's available. You don't have to be connected to a school or to any particular association.
So I guess my next question then would be, follow up on that. Has there been much publicity about this? Is it fine for me to, we have a LinkedIn group for our Gender Equality Principles Initiative. I have a Twitter account. I mean, I think it's an amazing resource, and I haven't wanted to publicize it until I knew that people can access it.
Again, I'll give the brief answer on that. Of course, we'd like as many people as possible to visit this site and use the resources and spread the word. So I would say, yes, please, by all means, share the link, share your contact information through whatever means you have possible, through LinkedIn, through Twitter, through personal contacts, and so forth. I think we're really pushing to get the message out there. Again, I'll turn it over to Pat to provide her thoughts.
Okay, regarding in your earlier comment, you said, I think you said you also had company
Well, yeah, so, I mean, we've been working, you know, on our project with 6 or 7 different companies in particular, and, you know, we just actually drafted a case study of some of the work that they've been doing with us. So that's kind of in its final stages right now.
Yes.
We were actually since we're not a university, we were kind of wondering where would be some best places to publish it. But I'm assuming if we gave you a draft, we could still go ahead and try and get that published.
Yeah, absolutely, you could do that. And I would encourage you, you don't have it quite clarified whether what will go to Maureen or what will go to Catherine or what will go to me. We have to work on that a little bit. But for now, I would say just send whatever you have to me. My email is on the slides. And then let us figure out where the right place in the organization is.
Yeah, and if you have any suggestions, that would be great. It's
great.
It's almost final stage, not quite. It needs to be edited a little bit more. But I wouldn't mind feedback either.
Great.
Okay,
well, thanks for that question, Anne. That's great. I also have a question from Maureen or Pat. So Maureen, I'll let you speak up and direct your question to Pat.
Thanks, Jed. I just wanted to follow up with Anne. Also, Anne's been working with me on the corporate social responsibility repository area, and the city of San Francisco, where she's working, has done an amazing job of working with something similar to the women's empowerment principles. So that's an example of partnerships that we can further develop outside of the university area. And thanks very much, Anne, for joining us and continuing that good work. Now, Pat, I had a question. Pat, as many of you would know, perhaps has had a lot of experience as a dean, and I think Catherine also is involved in business school administration. So maybe the question for the both of them is, what does it take to get this further on the agenda of the deans? Are there any sort of specific strategies that you can share with us in the minute or two that we have remaining? What would be our key argument to try and get deans to buy into this?
I'd be happy to take a first shot at it. One of the groups in particular we're interested in working with is called the Prime Affinity Group. So last year in February, they invited me to attend the and embraced this wholeheartedly because they really see this as a tool to guide faculty to. So next month in January, I am also going to speak to them. Invited to speak to them as well. Additional thing I think will help to get the word out, especially to deans, and an application that they have called BizEd, an article that describes the repository and how to access it. So we'll be following up in that in the next few weeks.
Great, thank you, Pat.
Yes, thanks, Pat. If I could just add to that.
Sure, Catherine, go ahead.
Sorry, if I could just add to that, I think that one of the things I've seen quite specifically in the UK, where Prime has really taken off, is the need for the business schools to embed this responsible management within their mission and their vision, and that seems to be happening quite a lot. So in terms of convincing deans that this is an important agenda, this is all part of a much broader issue of the whole notion of responsible management, and the gender equality part of it is just one part of that much bigger issue. So what I'm finding with our deans is that they're looking to develop a niche for their business school. They're looking to ensure that the schools are properly accredited by ACCSB, or EQUIS is the other major accrediting body, or AMBER, and all of these accrediting bodies are increasingly valuing responsible management as part of what they're looking for in the mission and vision of a business school. So if we can link into that agenda and make the gender equality aspect part of that agenda, then I think it does appeal deans, and they are keen to roll out this kind of program.
Thank you for adding that, Catherine. Of course, that's our goal here at Prime, is to have these issues embedded into the curriculum of our different business schools. I have two more questions, and we have just under 5 minutes. The first is from Eileen Sarson, and it's a shorter question for Pat. She says, Pat, would you reiterate the acronym or information for the Academy of Management link? Pat, is that something you're able to do now, or is that something we can follow up with later?
It's GDO, Gender and Diversity in Organizations. I don't have the link right here, but I can certainly follow up with Eileen on that. But it's the gender, it's within the Academy of Management, and it's their specific group on and diversity organizations, and it's a separate site within the Academy of Management website.
Okay, great. Eileen, that's something we can also follow up with. You have Pat's contact information. I'm sure she'd be happy to send you the direct link. We have one last question. It's coming from Jordi Tebe, and Jordi says, first of all, thanks for the great job you've done on the Gender Equity Working Group. He has a question for all presenters about an issue that he thinks could be fixed through Prime. He says, according to the Spanish National Statistics Research Report on 2011, men still have a higher wage than women, whether they work full-time or if they work part-time. It says, for example, 43% of women are paid less than 1,200 euro compared to 18% of men. It says, how is that wage gap being treated on the gender equity resources you provide? So it is a question about the wage gap and the manner in which that's addressed through the resources that we're providing here in the gender equity group and the repository. Would any of the three of you like to speak up on that? I think the issue is particularly where to go for information on that question.
Yeah, I mean, this is Maureen. Thanks for that question. I think it's really important, and I think one of the reasons why there's a wage gap, there's a number of reasons, but I think one of the reasons that it's been pervasive for the past 35 years, 40 years, it hasn't really moved that much in any of the industrialized countries, is because we have still a lot of gender discrimination after students graduate from university, for example. That's one of the key reasons. And part of what we're doing in this repository is also looking at how gender is addressed in not only in the curriculum, but also how female students, for example, fare in business schools, career choices after they graduate, issues of leadership and bias around different leadership styles, all of these things put together. And there's also kind of a dissatisfaction among females, according to a lot of surveys, with MBA programs and the type of sort of the highly kind of masculinist nature of many MBA programs, etc. So I think it's a great question, and a lot of what we've done in the repository is designed to address some of those factors. And I think by making gender and gender discrimination an important issue for firms and companies, we're going to do something to address this wage gap. But I think that's a really important question.
Pat, I would just like wage gap. I would really like to point out on slide 12 the syllabus that's on gender perspectives in economic analysis. That's the one that only had 84 references, but there are quite a few of those that specifically address wage gaps, and they do so in the United States as well as emerging countries as well as Europe and several others. So I think that would be actually a very good resource to see what the current research is, and that syllabus is quite current. So that would be a very good resource. Hello? Des, are you there?